The other day, I came across a Sunstone article written on April 18th of 2019, entitled "Sin Does Not Exist, and Believing That It Does Is Ruining Us" by Richard Bellrock. Now, such a provocative title piqued my interest and got me thinking about how my own thoughts on sin have changed as my own faith deconstructed. Welcome, friends, enemies, and everyone in between, to my channel, The Masked Mormon. I am in fact the Masked Mormon.
Why you wearing a mask? Were you burned by acid or something like that?
Oh no, it's just they're terribly comfortable. I think everyone will be wearing them in the future.
I'm a Mormon who used to believe in the truth claims of the Mormon Church. Then, after a faith crisis, I realized the church wasn't what it claimed to be. My faith crumbled. Now I talk about the implications of Mormon doctrine, history, and some of my own personal experiences on the internet with you fine viewers. Now, I'm going to come right out and say that I no longer believe in the concept of sin. As my belief in the gods taught by the religions, the devil, and the need for a savior unraveled, so did my belief in sin. Now, that isn't saying I don't believe in morality or in treating people like I want to be treated, but it is saying that I don't believe that there is some being taking account of when I run afoul of its commandments. The concept of sin is an important aspect of Christian and Mormon theology. Sin is willfully disobeying God's commandments, or not acting righteously despite knowing the truth. Or, in the words of St. Augustine, quote, "a word, deed, or desire in opposition to the eternal law of God," end quote. From the Gospel Principles Manual put out by the Church, sin is to know what is good and to not do it. It is a transgression of the laws of God. Sin separates the sinner from God and is essential to the concept of the atonement of Jesus Christ. According to Christianity, we are all broken, we are all dirty, and we are all deserving of the wrath of God unless we accept Jesus. In Mormonism, quote, "the natural man is an enemy to God and has been from the fall of Adam and will be forever and ever unless he yields to the enticings of the Holy Spirit," end quote. Alan Watts once said that Christianity has institutionalized guilt as a virtue. Jesus then comes to rescue us from the wrath of his Father, who cannot look at any level of sin to any degree of allowance. God cannot extend any degree of mercy at the expense of justice, whatever that is. If he did, he would cease to be God, according to Alma 42:25. The Sunstone article argues that sin is not something that exists and actually contributes nothing to our understanding of morality. The article asks the question, quote, "is something good because God says so, or are good things independent of God?" Now, this is, of course, a description of the divine command theory. Divine command theory is the philosophy that an action is morally right if it is commanded by God, and morally wrong if God prohibits it. A great real-world example of this would be something like a sign that tells you to slow down near a school. Is it good to slow down because the sign says so? Or is it good to slow down for children? Divine command theory claims the former. According to divine command theory, the value comes from the sign, not the goodness of slowing down for children. Now, this distinction can be sussed out by looking at a couple of hypothetical situations using this same example. The first, say you're driving out in the middle of nowhere. No schools, no towns, no nothing. And you come across a slow school zone sign. The sign's presence is arbitrary. Is there value in slowing down when you don't need to? Is the purpose of the sign for the sign's sake, or is it to keep children safe? Divine command theory would say one thing, whereas the value of keeping children safe would suggest something else. The second example is if you come to a school zone and the sign tells you that you can speed up to 100 miles an hour. Do you accelerate? Is it acceptable to suddenly accelerate near children because the sign says so? Divine command theory would suggest one thing, and the value of keeping children safe would suggest something else. Why are there speed reduction signs near schools? Is it because there are signs, or is it to keep children safe? Divine command theory says the goodness of the act is the value of the sign itself. Divine command theory is a feature of many religions, including Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Each religion has its own series of rules, commandments, philosophical traditions, and cultural mores. These are designed to keep their adherents on the straight and narrow path. Violations of these are often considered sins by their respective adherents. Each religious tradition claims that these acts are commanded by God. And in the modified words of Socrates, quote, "Does God approve of an act because it is virtuous, or is an act virtuous because God says it is?" End quote. If an act is virtuous and God approves of it, then it is virtuous independent of whether God says so. Its goodness pre-exists God. If the act is virtuous because God says it is, then the act isn't virtuous in and of itself, but because of God's endorsement. Under divine command theory, you need to accept that stealing, murder, rape, and any other act would be virtuous if God commands it. It would even be virtuous if God commanded you to hate him. Now, this can cause some problems in other religions who believe God has always existed. But Mormonism believes in a finite God. God was once a man who became exalted by living a series of pre-existing laws. God then upholds these laws. If he didn't, then he would cease to be God. God's morality was learned from a source outside of him, which may suggest that morality is a universal concept separate from God. However, what if God commands something that is abhorrent? Even if morality pre-exists God, is something good because God commands it or not? Joseph Smith answered this question in The Happiness Letter. In 1842, Joseph Smith proposed marriage to then 19-year-old Nancy Rigdon, the daughter of one of his most faithful followers. By this time, Joseph had already entered into plural marriages with 10 other women. Nancy flatly refused his proposal. Then, a few days later, Joseph dictated a letter that was delivered to her by his secretary, Willard Richards. This letter is what's called the Happiness Letter. Now, this letter is still quoted today. You may have heard the opening sentence quoted in General Conference, or even in your local congregations. It opens, quote, "Happiness is the object and design of our existence, and will be the end thereof, if we pursue the path that leads to it. And this path is virtue, uprightness, faithfulness, holiness, and keeping all the commandments of God." End quote. Now, this sounds pretty reasonable, right? Especially in the context of most religious sensibilities. Some may even consider this a beautiful and uplifting sentiment. However, Joseph is putting virtue, faithfulness, and holiness on the same level with keeping the commandments, which again, by the standards of any Christian, may seem reasonable. However, this also includes keeping all of Joseph's claimed commandments. The letter continues, quote, "But we cannot keep all the commandments without first knowing them, and we cannot expect to know all or more than we now know unless we comply with or keep those we have already received. That which is wrong under one circumstance may be and often is right under another. God said, 'Thou shalt not kill.' At another time he said, 'Thou shalt utterly destroy.' This is the principle on which the government of heaven is conducted, by revelation adapted to the circumstances in which the children of the kingdom are placed. Whatever God requires is right, no matter what it is, although we may not see the reason thereof till long after the events transpire. Even things which may be considered abominable to all who understand the order of heaven only in part. but which in reality were right because God gave and sanctioned by special revelation. End quote. Whew. So Joseph is teaching that everything God gives us is lawful and right. This is a clear adoption of divine command theory. This is further upheld by the maxim that has been taught by the church since at least 1873, that, quote, obedience is the first law of heaven, end quote. Apostle Bruce R. McConkie taught, obedience is the first law of heaven, the cornerstone upon which all righteousness and progression rest. It consists in compliance with divine law, in conformity to the mind and will of deity, in complete subjugation to God and his commands, end quote. Although there may be multiple ways to interpret the maxim, it appears to be saying that obedience takes priority over all other moral principles and moral intuitions. This is clearly taught in the Book of Mormon. In 1 Nephi chapter 4, Nephi is commanded to behead an unconscious man in order to obtain a set of records that were in that man's possession. President Heber J. Grant, the seventh president of the church, taught to, quote, always keep your eye on the president of the church, and if he ever tells you to do anything and it is wrong and you do it, the Lord will bless you for it, end quote. Whoa. Obedience in Mormonism takes precedence over all other moral considerations. This has the benefit of solving the problems of arbitrary rules or abhorrent commands. The claim of revelation from God can be applied to shut down any objection. Even criticism of the leaders can be shut down in the face of obedience. Apostle Dallin H. Oaks taught, quote, it is wrong to criticize the leaders of the church, even if the criticism is true, end quote. The LDS conception of God requires individuals to cede their internal locus of moral control and moral development, though usually not to God himself, but to the church, which provides a checklist of good behaviors. Do I live the law of tithing? Do I follow the word of wisdom? Do I do my ministering? Do I attend all my meetings? Do I attend the temple? Am I willing to consecrate everything that God has blessed me with, or may bless me with, to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? A person cannot get into the highest level of heaven in Mormonism by just being virtuous. One must be obedient to the laws of Mormonism. Mormonism's version of divine command theory demands obedience to the laws of God. Obedience, then, seems to be the God of Mormonism. Now, the problem is that other religions also have a similar standard. A believer may ask, what's the harm in living according to the LDS version of divine command theory? Any Mormon will claim that their worldview is correct. However, the problem arises when other religions claim the very same thing. Other religions have a different list of commandments. Every culture ultimately generates religions, gods, and commandments that justify themselves. People always make gods in their own image. So, why all this talk about divine command theory in a discussion about sin? Because it is impossible to judge between competing sets of unfalsifiable beliefs. A believer may say something along the lines of, well, there's good in all religions. But if that's so, then divine command theory is indistinguishable from moral relativism, which is often derided by people of faith. Believers will claim that there is an objective morality, something that is universal, that there are actions and beliefs that are inherently good or bad that universally apply to everyone, independent of individual opinion or cultural norms, and that acts contrary to this objective morality constitute sin. They will then say that non-believers have a subjective morality, or live by the philosophies of moral relativism, or in the words of Mormonism, the philosophies of men mingled with Scripture. That whatever is right is relative to time, culture, or changing values. However, as we have discussed, there is no way to tell what is objectively right. Each religion has their own set of commandments and list of sins. There is no way to reconcile them to each other. There may be some overlap, but they will all be different. Now, Mormonism will claim the virtue of continuing revelation. However, it doesn't get away from this epistemological minefield, even with continuing revelation. All religions, Mormonism included, are ultimately moral relativists, especially those that ascribe to any amount of divine command theory. God may say not to kill, then command you to behead an unconscious man. God may say not to commit adultery, then command you to marry other women, to marry children, or to marry other men's wives. God may say that a man is responsible for his own sins and not for the sins of his fathers, but then say that whole races of people are cursed because of some unknown act in premortal life or from some ancestor. These are all, of course, examples of contradictory actions throughout Mormon history. If whatever God commands is right, then that is moral relativism. Any number of atrocities have been justified by religious believers all through history. Judaism, Islam, and Christianity have all perpetrated heinous acts on each other and on themselves, and have all claimed that they have the mark of approval by God. Now, I used to believe in sin. I used to believe that I was a sinner and that I was broken and needed Jesus to save me. But all of the traditions that taught that to me lost credibility as I deconstructed and delved into their respective histories. Now, it's funny, when one deconstructs Mormonism, the same tools are just as useful to deconstruct the claims of other faith traditions. Now, there may or may not be a God, but I think one thing is certain. If there is, it's not found in any of the religions. I think people do good things despite their religions, not because of them. I don't believe in sin. I do, however, believe in morality. I have heard believers say that without directives from God, then there is no moral standard, and without the threat of punishment, then there's no reason not to go out and commit all forms of crimes and abuses. To that I say, if the only reason you don't do something bad is that you think that a God is watching you and will punish you if you do it, then you are not a good person. If you can look someone in the eye and honestly tell them that in the absence of the fear of consequences, you have no reason to kill, steal, cheat, or abuse, then you are morally inferior to a person who does not need to be told by God not to do those things. The comedian Ricky Gervais has a bit in which he is asked, as an atheist, what keeps him from murdering and raping as much as he wants, and he responds that he already murders and rapes as much as he wants. That amount is 0. He doesn't need some external locus of control telling him those things are bad. Mormonism is a religion where God may tell you to do anything, and you are expected to be obedient to the authorities that tell you to do it. They may tell you to give your daughters to the president of the church as polygamous wives. They may tell you to massacre settlers at Mountain Meadows or exterminate the Timpanogos tribe in the Utah Valley. They may tell you that black people are cursed and are forbidden from entering your temples or participating in full fellowship. They may perform electroshock therapy on gay members in an effort to cure their gay, and then lie about it. They may hide billions of dollars from the federal government and then lie about it, only to be fined by the same federal government. They may hide their history and lie about it to their members because it implies some uncomfortable things that they don't want people to know. The God of Mormonism is apparently fine with allowing these terrible things and at the same time shaming teenagers and young adults when they pleasure themselves, or they have consensual, healthy relationships with each other, or if they have a cup of coffee, or decide what underwear they want to wear, or if they don't want to give 10% of their money to the church. So no, I don't believe that sin exists, because there would be no way to determine what sin actually is. But like I said, I do believe that there is a morality that can be applied fairly generally. However, I also believe that it is relative to a lot of factors, and that our morality has evolved over the centuries. You see, human beings are social animals. One of our strengths is the ability to cooperate with each other. Some 50,000 years ago, a lone human on the savannah would be vulnerable to any number of predators or other threats. But in groups, these people would share resources, watch out for each other, reproduce with each other, and generally increase the chances of survival of the group. With that cooperation came a certain morality. The humans that worked well with each other in their tribes succeeded. You share your resources and others share with you. You watch their back, they watch yours. But if someone in the tribe didn't share their resources, or would take more than their share, or wasn't dependable, or would kill another member of the group, they were a threat to the group. Or if someone was socially out of line, or they ran afoul of the social norms of the group, they would not be a dependable member of that group. Now, if a person did this enough, they would be exiled or shunned by the group, and this shunning could threaten the survival of this troublemaker, because a lone human is a dead human. This threat of exile or shunning was often enough to keep groups in line. Our sense of group dynamics, fair play, cooperation, not killing, etc., all come from tens of thousands of years of surviving as groups. Our innate morality comes from cooperative success. We are social and hierarchical. We have the gift of language. We could gossip about the tribe member that wasn't pulling their own weight, or who was sleeping with the chief's daughter, or who killed the best hunter in a fit of rage. This is a consequence of our particular evolutionary journey. If, on the other hand, we were lions, it would be perfectly acceptable to expect that if a new lion took control of our pride, then he would kill all of the cubs of the previous lion. Our own morality is born out of our social natures. Our tribes have been getting bigger as nations have developed, and as we connect with the rest of the world. And our ability to cooperate on larger and larger scales has evolved by the use of mythologies. Now, by mythology, I mean shared stories that convey shared values. These mythologies have taken the form of lore, legends, and religions. They knit us together. Today, 335 million Americans are knit together by a shared story that is the United States of America. We have a tribal nature, and that tribalism has grown and developed over the years. We need to be part of a group or a tribe. That's why it is so distressing when we are excluded from social groups. But it's also easy for malicious actors to manipulate our innate tribalism and turn us against each other. Demagogues can use our own natures against us to turn one group against another. War, racism, bigotry, hatred, nationalism, etc. are all times when this happens. I think sin also comes from this hijacking of our innate moral systems. Ultimately, we know it is better to cooperate with each other, to work together, to share, to live and let live, to succeed together. Yes, this morality is relative to the time and place, but there are certain universal constants in that malleable morality. If you harm others in your group or take advantage of the trust of the group, then you will eventually run afoul of the group and will find yourself rejected by that group or on the receiving end of the group's ire. A lone human is a dead human, and the need to not be alone is a powerful force in keeping people cooperating with each other. Often disaster movies or post-apocalyptic movies will show people devolving into an every man for himself type of mentality. You may know people who have fantasies about everything falling apart and are doomsday preppers. They think that they will be able to survive all on their own with their own resources and their own knowledge. But people band together to work together. Those that band together and cooperate will be able to overwhelm that lone prepper. This is all a part of our evolutionary success. For me, Sin is about as useful for explaining why things are good or evil as appealing to Zeus's thunderbolt to explain the weather. All religions ultimately resort to divine command theory to try to describe what is right and wrong, what is righteous and what is sinful. But because we can't determine any sort of objective or universal law, what is sinful is just as arbitrary as the faith tradition that holds it. And the person who feels that without God's commandments and watchful eye over them, they would do all manner of terrible things to their fellow beings, they aren't good people. But what are your thoughts? Do you still believe in sin? Are you able to resolve the issues with divine command theory? Let me know down in the comments. If you like what I do, please press the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.